Hello and welcome to Transformations Cafe, where we're serving light as bold as love. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Transformations Cafe is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation. We're a nonprofit, all volunteer organization. Our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world, individually and collectively. If you haven't already done so, please visit our website, theglobaltransformation.org. If you'd like to join our community, there's a join button at the top of each page on the site, and you'll find more information about both our free and paid membership options. And if you'd like to support our work, and these days our expenses, like everyone's, are going up, so we would love to have some more support, including for programs like this. There's also a donate button at the top of every page that takes you straight through to PayPal. And to start our new year of programs, we're delighted once again to welcome back for the third time now, Georgia Lambert. Georgia is an amazing teacher and skilled and talented in many areas. And I'll read a formal bio in a little bit, but it really is, it's heartening, it's fun, and a joy personally and professionally to have Georgia back. We want to ask Georgia to share both her background and what may come through her to tell us about what the ancient wisdom can tell us about this new year that started a couple of weeks ago, and how we might use those teachings to live in a time that many, I believe, are kind of feeling or increasingly troubling or challenging times. And so hoping perhaps we'll hear some things tonight and learn some things that can help us get through the day to day. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to look at the past conversations we've had with Georgia, especially the one we did last January. I hope we don't repeat too much of that. But some of that information is contemporary still, and I would encourage people to go ahead and take a look at that conversation as well. We also made a conscious effort to have Georgia define some terms that not everyone may be familiar with. And so if we do talk about some things this evening and you don't recognize them, there's a good chance that we explained what those things are last year. So a lot of what we talked about and what Georgia shared bears repeating. So again, I would encourage you to go back and look at those previous conversations. So I'll do a brief bio read here so that anyone who may not know who Georgia is and her background will be familiar, and then we'll get into our conversation. Georgia Lambert is an internationally acclaimed instructor who teaches numerous esoteric classes. She has over 50 years of experience in the field of esoteric studies, receiving formal training in Eastern and Western disciplines, methods, and traditions. She was the first to be licensed by the state of California to teach meditation and esoteric physiology, and she served for 10 years on the teaching staff of the Philosophical Research Society under Manly Palmer Hall. Specializing in the synthesis of Western mystery tradition, she has addressed private groups in both the United States and in Britain. She's currently teaching in-depth classes to students around the world via an online audiovisual medium and has taught consistently for the last 40 years. Her classes cover a wide range of esoteric traditions and meditation techniques, including the Ageless Wisdom, the Kabala, Masonry, and the Arthurian Quest for the Grail. And we'll include a link to George's website in the program notes for this program. So with that, Georgia, welcome back to Transformations Cafe.
Nice to be here. It's been so boring. Whatever will we talk about?
Yes, well, we always can count on you when we're, just can't figure out who else we could invite. And we'll kick it around and talk about, I don't know, dogs and cars or something. So we'll see. Actually, I thought I'd start off and ask you the question that was posed in our promotions for tonight. So happy 2025, or is it happy 2025?
Um, well, we're definitely moving forward. It may seem like we're taking steps backward, but not necessarily so. You know, there's in my classes, I always use this example. There's a wonderful old Broadway play, Man of La Mancha. And in that particular play, the sidekick to Don Quixote makes a statement. It doesn't matter whether the rock hits the pitcher or the pitcher hits the rock, it's going to go bad for the pitcher. And so the soul of humanity is overshadowing and pressing downward to claim its instrumentality. And what we're seeing is the tremendous resistance to that. Unfortunately, as we look out into the life and affairs of humanity, all we see is the resistance. We don't see what's causing it. As many of you have heard me say before, matter that isn't threatened doesn't fuss. So if matter is resisting this hard, it means the solutions are close and overshadowing.
Well, that I think is part of what we're going to explore a bit more in depth in this conversation. Before we do so, I thought it might be good to see if you know of anything specific or in particular that the Ageless Wisdom might have to say about the year 2025.
Well, several different esoteric traditions talk about this particular year. It's said that the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, called the Great White Brotherhood, the spiritual hierarchy, the invisible college, the conclave of masters or adepts, there's many different names and different systems. It's said that every 100 years they have at their own level above human interaction, they have a conclave where they decide what activity of the wisdom they're going to unfold for humanity to learn from for the next 100 years. This is dependent upon the ongoing outpicturing of the planetary life, but the details also have to do with where humanity is and how humanity is receptive enough to receive things. So the details of bringing the planetary will and its unfoldment into relationship with humanity, which builds that will outward into matter, is something the hierarchy decides, the hierarchy being sort of the middleman between the will of God and the appearance of God. So every 100 years, there's this conclave. The last one was in 1925. And the conclave is again this year. And we're told that the main agenda for this particular conclave is the details of the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ, meaning the Christedness, perhaps in a great avatar or teacher or leader, but also the reappearance of the Christ within the human heart that's been buried, that must come up to meet that overshadowing Christ coming in. So the details of this, again, have to do with the externalization of that spiritual hierarchy, which in much earlier times in humanity's history has been open and apparent. And because of the, here it comes, the dreaded A word, the Atlantean period, humanity has sort of been on quarantine. Well, that's about to be over. But the details of how that takes place to be rolled out over this next 100 years is the main agenda for this hierarchical meeting. So 2025 is a really big deal.
Are we talking about then humanity taking its next great evolution in consciousness?
We hope so. Certainly in my classes, we talk about the fact that we're in this much longer term transition than 100 years, but we are in this transition where a new kingdom is being born within humanity, the kingdom of conscious souls, which is an expansion of humanity's consciousness. This new kingdom is being born within humanity. Another way of looking at it would be the completion of the first initiation, or the opening of the heart, humanity's heart, which has to do with service and group relationship and identification with the one life which we are. So how all of this will unfold, again, is up for grabs. It depends on the choices that humanity makes in terms of how the details play out as we move into this next 2,500 years.
So is the conclave kind of like laying out the blueprint or the roadmap then for how these interactions will be guided perhaps in the next
Yeah,
100 years?
I think so. And also that's of course always subject to modification depending on humanity's reaction and how humanity embodies that overshadowing.
Which is that an aspect of free will?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, free will is relative, isn't it? I mean, the cell on the back of your hand has its own life and affairs, its own cycles. But if you decide to go to the grocery store, it goes with you, regardless of what it chooses. So we're part of this planetary life, which is part of the solar life. And these greater lives have their agenda and their time period. So, it depends on the details that we come up with in terms of our own embodiment. We can make this a smoother experience or a more difficult experience, depending on the choices we make.
Mhm.
But as I always say in my class, no matter how strong the personality of humanity, the little will is, it's not stronger than the soul who built that personality.
Which is a big statement in a few words, and I think we're going to get back and touch on some of that. At least the questions I've jotted down will, but I thought it might also be helpful to maybe get the perspective of the wisdom and what you can share about kind of so what's going on. And for instance, you've talked in other conversations about kind of echoes from the past. And so can you elaborate a little bit on that and kind of what you think might be what's happening and why things are so seemingly, I don't know, increasingly chaotic is one thought that comes to mind.
Well, of course, this is going on all over the planet. It's not just in our nation, right? If you keep up with the news in other places, this is a big choice point for humanity to make. And as far as our country goes, I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it in this format. Maybe I have. Maybe it's something we talked about in one of my earlier appearances. But this particular nation is interesting in a karmic way because we are related to every country on the face of the planet, because our people come from every country on the face of the planet. And therefore, this particular nation, like all nations, every nation has its soul and has its personality. And every nation has a spiritual gift to give to the greater whole, as well as things to work out and so forth. This particular nation, its particular gift is transmutation. It takes in certain negative patterns, embodies them, lifts them up, and heals them. And I'll give you an example before we talk about, what's going on today. And please forgive me if you've heard this example before. When we think of our Civil War, and people have said history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, it echoes. And as we've talked about before, we've got a lot of echoes going on. We've got echoes going all the way back to the Atlantean period. We've got echoes going back to the Civil War. We've got echoes going back to World War II, echoes going back from the 60s. It's all out on the table now. But if we go back, for instance, to the Civil War period, and remember the economy of the world at that time, slavery as a pattern is one of the most ancient evils of humanity. Every nation, going back as far as our history reaches, had that form as part of its economy, whether it's the Sumerians or Babylonians or Greek or Roman or Vikings took slaves. Everybody was slave to somebody else. It was an accepted part of planetary economy. Because this nation took that on and embodied it and went through that, the worst war this country's ever been through, it's no longer part of the world economy. That's a form that's thousands and thousands of years old. It still exists in some parts of the planet on the black market. It's not completely eradicated, but it's no longer an internationally accepted part of the planet's economy. And all the souls that participated in that horrible experience did so at great service to taking that blow against that form that's been with us for thousands and thousands of years. So this country does that. We take on those negative patterns in order to lift them up. And I did have something that I wanted to share along these lines because, gosh, I thought it might come up. And this speaks to something that went on in World War II, but it has echoes of what we're facing today. This is a book called Messianic Legacy by the people that did Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Bajent, Lee, and Lincoln. And if you'll bear with me, because they put it better than I could ever say it, I just want to read 2 paragraphs from this work because it has relevance for what we're dealing with today.
Great.
Let's see if I can get the right glasses here. The First World War had been an insane war. What made it particularly terrible was that the madness was both rampant and as diffused and all-pervasive as a cloud of poison gas. There were no real heroes or villains. Everyone was to blame, and no one was to blame. Everyone wanted it, and no one wanted it. And once underway, the whole thing had a grim juggernaut momentum of its own, which no one was able to control. The madness in the First World War was essentially formless, and that which lacks form cannot be opposed. That's an important point. That which lacks form cannot be opposed. The only possible solution was attention and exhaustion. In contrast, the Second World War made sense. Not only was it a sane war, it was perhaps the most sane war to have been fought in modern history. It was sane so far as the Allied powers were concerned, precisely because Germany had effectively incarnated into itself the burden of humanity's collective madness. By taking upon its own shoulders mankind's capacity for horror, for outrage, for atrocity, for bestiality, Germany paradoxically redeemed the rest of the Western world into sanity. And it took Auschwitz and Belsen to teach us the meaning of evil, not as an abstract theological proposition, but as a concrete reality. It took Auschwitz and Belsen to teach us the acts we were capable of and to make us want to repudiate them. Unlike the war of 1914 to 1918, the war against the Third Reich became a legitimate crusade in the name of decency, humanity, civilization. To that extent, Germany conferred a renewed sense of meaning, not only on her own deluded people, but more validly on the rest of the Western world as well. There was no question of where that evil lay, and it was evil, not just stupidity, not even conventional tyranny, such as might have been associated with the Kaiser or Napoleon or even Stalin. In short, the world's collective madness, by being, and here's the kicker, in short, the world's collective madness, by being embodied in a specific people, acquired form. And once endowed with form, it could be opposed. The act of opposing it restored a lapsed hierarchy of values. I think that's beautifully put. You know, even in the esoteric community, there's many different opinions as to what's right and what's wrong with the world today. But the point is that it's being given form. You know, people made their choices mentally when things were just thoughts, and they made their choices emotionally when their emotional natures got into the mix. But now we're at the place where we're going to see, not only in our country, but the rest of the planet, what are we really going to stand for physically? When it comes down to the physical plane and physical things are involved, this is where the rubber meets the road and choices will be made.
Thanks, Georgia. That was enlightening, but it also was inspiring in a couple of ways. You know, it's perhaps in some ways been easy to feel less than positive about being an American for those of us who are in the United States. And I don't say that lightly because it's something that, you know, I still have a great sense of happiness and pride in, but it's been challenged. And yet when you talk about the role of this country being so important as to transmute things like slavery being an accepted form of economy on the planet, and then this country transmuted it. Yeah, it's inspiring from a human perspective, but it also helps to bring back that perspective of there's something so much bigger and greater that we're all a part of.
And to understand the mechanics of how some of this works is when you enter into a relationship, whether it's one-on-one relationship between people or between nations, you establish a relationship. Whether it's positive or negative doesn't matter. We know that energy follows thought, force follows attention, and recognition produces relationship. When you create with another entity, again, a person or a nation or a group to group, any kind of relationship, there becomes a sort of shared mechanism of interaction. And the patterns of one are open to the other. And there's a trade-off. It's like entering a dance, whether that dance is with an enemy or an ally. It's a dance and patterns are traded. A good example of this would be, for instance, if you hang around somebody long enough, you begin to pick up their mannerisms. People that have been married for a long time, you know, echo each other. We know that, for instance, the United States, among, of course, the rest of the allies, entered into relationship with Germany and Japan and Italy. And we took on some of those patterns, especially when they were physically appropriated, like the thousands of scientists that came over here as part of Operation Paperclip. So we took on a lot of that ideology, but it's been under the table. It's been quiet, but now it's being brought to the surface to be healed, to be cleansed. Is it going to be easy? Not particularly. but the timing is there.
Let's talk a little bit more about that healing and cleansing. And I mentioned that a phrase came to me within the past couple of weeks about what we're seeing currently was a necessary disgrace, and that as you have spoken before, we don't have to learn through pain and suffering. It just seems to be where we're at in terms of our collective development in general. We don't quite know how to just learn from positive experience.
I
Um,
know, and it doesn't have to be that way. We could always, choose to learn through joy or the first time something comes around, but no. We have to wait until it comes around again and again and again, and it builds up such strength that we have to deal with it. And here we are today.
so the having to deal with it, let's dive into that a little bit more. What makes it so that we have to deal with these things to clear and heal? What is behind that? And that also is informed by the wisdom. So
Well,
what
this is the overshadowing soul of humanity pressing downward, trying to claim its instrumentality, and the personality's little will resisting that.
but is it the ultimate trajectory of evolution and growth that really is behind this, that
Sure.
things aren't can't stay static. We're growing towards something greater, something more positive. And in order to get there, unfortunately, we have to, it appears, experience some things that are, at least in human perspective.
We will embody our higher selves, whether we do it kicking and screaming
Right.
or with joyful cooperation is our choice. But that union of higher and lower life will happen because it's part of the planet's unfoldment. It's not just ours, it's part of our planet's unfoldment and our planet's relationship within the solar system.
So also kind of along these lines, I think some may have questions about, and I guess I wanted to ask this just because it feels like something we ought to include in the conversation. Um, Talking about energies or forces beyond just what we might call the day-to-day human existence or quote unquote reality. And so there are forces of light and dark. So I guess I want to ask, first of all, is that true? And then what might be going on kind of at that level or dimension in what we're seeing today?
Well, now you're talking about stuff that's perhaps above my pay grade
Okay.
to comment on. But certainly, we're seeing the clashing of duality, right? And on so many different fronts. And this is also part of humanity's destiny, is to be the balance point. In esoteric tradition, there are 7 kingdoms in the life of a planet: the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, the kingdom of conscious souls, the kingdom of adeptship or mastery, and the kingdom of the planetary life itself. Humanity is the middle kingdom. We are the bridge between the higher spiritual kingdoms in nature and the lower manifested kingdoms in nature. We also are that kingdom of synthesis because we have something within us from all of those kingdoms. We are spiritual beings, but we also have within us something of the mineral, vegetable, and these are certainly animal bodies that we inhabit. So humanity is that neck of the hourglass that allows the macrocosm to manifest in the microcosm. The old phrase, as above, so below. We're not there yet. The below doesn't match the above. It will, and humanity is a major instrumentality of bringing that about.
Okay, so we don't know, or we can't necessarily say, yes, this is a larger light and dark, but
One,
we
one,
do.
one would think, it's said that our solar system is bigger than what's physically apparent. There are planets that are out of incarnation right now or between incarnations, and it's a bigger life than what we physically see, but it's a life. And as a life, it's growing and evolving. If we think of the planets as chakras within our solar system, our sun being the heart chakra of our solar system, this great life has its own agenda. And it's said that Earth is the last one whose life wave is still in physical dense, meaning, solids, liquids, and gases. But that's beginning to shift. And part of the work of this next 2,500 years is to move matter up a notch, to quicken its vibratory frequency so that our life and affairs are brought into harmony with greater life, probably within our solar system, but certainly beyond our solar system. So this transition that we're undergoing is like the breaking of an egg. The example I always use is the little chick first is within the eggshell until we grow and peck our way out of it. And then the next area that we have to master is the nest. And we learn how to hop around in the nest. And pretty soon we get little wings and we can hop out of the nest. And then we've got the barnyard to deal with. So in addition to becoming soul identified, this means also meeting the bigger family. And here comes the Star Trek reference for you geeks out there. Which do we meet first, the Romulans or the Vulcans? And that, of course, has to do with what are we in harmony with? Hence our choices.
May want to get into that a little bit. We'll see how this conversation goes because there's increasing discussion about contact, if you will, with other beings, and it's not only the stuff of certain circles that may be more inclined to pay attention to and or believe these things, but of course now we've got U.S. government reports and hearings and whatnot, so it's integrating more with quote unquote reality, again, quote unquote. Shifting gears a little bit, because I think there is a very human part of trying to cope in various ways with what's happening in the world, as well as our day-to-day lives. Georgia and I were talking before we went on this recording, and this is the time of year where you have to start getting things like taxes ready, and you still have to make sure you have groceries and gas in the car or charge your car or whatever it is. So there's day-to-day life, but with the things that are happening in the world and in the United States, for those of us that live here, is even more pressing. Now figuring out how to kind of integrate all of that with our day-to-day lives, I found it more challenging at times, and I know I'm not alone. And so I thought we might also be able to explore, with your help, what we might do to apply much of what you've just shared and other things the wisdom might have for us to integrate these things in our daily lives to help us continue to go forward and have our lives and be at least surviving and productive, if not go beyond that, to have rich, full lives as we have hopefully up till now.
Sure. I mean, in the last age, those that were drawn to the spiritual path entered a monastery or a nunnery and withdrew from the world. But we don't get to do that this time around. We have to be in the world, yet not of it, and at the same time be that connection between that which is spiritual life and daily life. In the East, they have an old saying, in terms of what do you do first, the saying is, first, you must boil your rice, meaning you do the thing that's immediately in front of you, and you do it with the highest and best attitude that you possibly can. With everything that's going on in the world, it's very easy to get caught up in the emotional hurricane of what's circulating within the emotional life of humanity and the lower concrete mental life of humanity. It's important to remember that every nation has its soul and its personality, and the alignment between the two is manned by the disciples and aspirants and spiritual seekers that live within its borders. So first and foremost, recognize that even though each of us has to deal with our own outward lives, we're not alone, that there is a spiritual community, not only in our nation, but around the world. And that network of light around the planet assures us that there's a connection between that overshadowing that's trying to move in and the resistance that's going on. And so it's important to realize that when we fall prey to our own separative thoughts, when we see people doing really stupid stuff, it's really easy to get snarky about it and fall into that. But if we can remember that our job as part of this incarnation is to be that connection between the overshadowing formless spiritual life and the life of form. And that means not falling from that place of balance, not falling into our worst emotions or our separative thoughts, because the spiritual population of the planet has more wattage in terms of nudging the force than the average individual, because their thoughts are clearer. So it becomes even more important that we take responsibility for what we are thinking and what we are saying and what we are feeling, because whatever it is, those thoughts are going out into the mental circulation of humanity to help or not. Same thing with the emotions. We're either helping the situation or not. So the idea is to remain fixed in our spiritual identity and the connection we make between that overshadowing and what we see on the surface. Talking about how hard this is, in the words of Jesus, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. We can get that. We can understand that. But the corollary is, Father, forgive them for they do not what they know. That's harder to forgive when we see people that should know better doing stupid stuff. And it's all over the planet right now. But this is the time where we need to stay in that balanced position and be that meditation alignment, be that connection between the spiritual life and the outer manifestation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Georgia. It's also part of the reason I encourage people to go back and watch last year's program and watch this again, because I'm finding, at least, and again, I know I'm not alone, hearing things like you just said over and over can be very helpful. It's not like you can just get this once and then something else comes up in life and you remember and you can just immediately return. At least I'm not there yet, and I know I'm not alone again. And so I thank you for saying these things and for giving us this form that people can return to and just hear this, to be reminded again, and to get their balance, get that alignment back. I think it's critical. And I know we have to be healthy now in order to go forward too. And that's part of that. We have had several folks that have written a couple of questions in the chat and want to know, what can we do to best assist the kingdom of souls? And we've got dangers that we're facing, and certainly our climate crisis is one of those that we are also dealing with, in addition to several others.
Well, the life of the soul, whether it's our individual overshadowing spiritual soul, our higher self, that part of us that's above and free of the form, whether it's the individual soul or the collective soul of humanity, that overshadowing soul is ready to precipitate and pour itself downward into the lower life the minute runways appear for it to do so. The only thing that's keeping it from descending is we're not in harmony with it. There's an old saying that the door of initiation is only a door and a barrier until you can vibrate at the same frequency as the door. When you vibrate at the same frequency as the door, it's no longer a barrier. So if we want the overshadowing soul to descend collectively and individually, we can't just want it. Number one, wanting something is an affirmation that you don't have it, first and foremost. That's really an important thing. To want something means you don't have it, and you're affirming that. So we can't just want it, we have to create it. You know, one of my sayings is, don't make a wish, make a plan. And so that means that we have to create down here something of a harmonic for that overshadowing to descend. That means if we want the soul to descend, we've got to proceed as if it were already here. We've got to act like we already are that soul. We already are that higher life. You know, a good measuring stick is, you know, as you're dealing with a situation in your life and affairs, ask yourself, you know, if the Christ were manifest right now, if I was the master right now in this situation, what would I think? What would I feel? What would I do? What would I say? And then do that. And as we do that, we're creating that vibratory frequency that is compatible with the descent of the soul. We're inviting it in. We're making a way for it.
That answer your question, Suzanne? Yeah, okay. So I think for all of that, so specific to the reference to global warming, I mean that's the type of thing. So then if I'm hearing you correctly, Georgia, that would be to say, well, we want answers instead of saying, what should we do about global warming? We say, okay, we understand it can be resolved, and we're open to just that knowing. And then
And
we
also, on a deeper level, don't assume that the planet's always going to be the same. You know, this planet has had ice ages. This planet has had more tropical climes. In esoteric literature, it says that eventually this planet's climate will be more tropical than it is today. You know, there are indications that at one time Antarctica was free of ice. We have ancient maps that show the topography of Antarctica without ice. Now, how did they know where those hidden mountains were and those hidden lakes were? Somebody way back then had a clue. So recognize that the climate of the planet itself is in flux, in change, and that's part of its evolvement. Now, are we pushing it over the edge prematurely? Yeah, and that has to be dealt with. But we're in a natural cycle where this is going to shift and change, and we're going to adapt to it.
Yeah, certainly Greg Braden, among others, is trying to share that it's the both and that you just described. So I think there's data behind that too. But to the larger,
and it's not just the climate. You know, in some of the Alice Bailey material, it talks about how we're entering in a time where there'll be more natural extinctions of certain species. And this has to be, otherwise the animal kingdom would always be locked in its forms and not be able to create newer and better forms. You know, the consciousness of the animal kingdom today is the same consciousness that, you know, bopped around as dinosaurs. That was good for that particular period, but now the animal kingdom has to incarnate into newer and more receptive bodies to its Christedness and its spirit. Maybe in the future there will be unicorns. We don't know. But the animal kingdom has to move along the line just like we do. Does that mean that we need to push against species prematurely into that abyss? No. And again, this is something we have to understand and take care of and be in the harmony of this change rather than either completely resisting it or completely bringing it in prematurely.
It seems it would also help to remember that we don't always know what the thing that is unfolding before us in the present tense, is it truly a good or a bad thing? I mean, we assign judgments to it, and oftentimes those things change their quality in time too. So I think having the patience to let things unfold seems to be another way to help get realigned and cope.
Even scientists are understanding this. I read an article a month or so ago about the evolution of the canine kingdom. You know, man's oldest best friend at first was our hunting companion, and then was our working companion, you know, the working dogs, the hunting dogs, that kind of thing. And now they're entering a new phase. And this is from scientists. They're saying that dogs in particular are moving into the companion stage. And there's genetic changes that accompany that shift in their consciousness, which is then translated to their form. And this is true of the vegetable kingdom and the mineral kingdom as well, although it's harder to understand in the mineral kingdom.
Suzanne, I know you have other questions. I've got two other people that have been in the queue for a little bit, so I want to get to those and then we'll come back if we can. Chris, you've been waiting patiently. You have a question you'd like to ask Georgia directly?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Georgia, for your teaching, your insights. I wanted to, and forgive me for coming in late, but I wanted to sort of ask you a question about the current events of the day. For instance, it seems like we're going back to the age of Andrew Jackson, wherein the rule of law was increasingly held in contempt because regulatory agencies interfered with the motivations to make only money. And so Ralph Waldo Emerson drops a bomb at Harvard's Phi Beta Kappa address in 1837 and instead says, you know, we should go into a new age where poetry leads, not replaces, but poetry leads, you know, the culture itself. And so he makes this radical suggestion that as a consequence of Jacksonian cowboy capitalism and all the devastation that caused the Panic of 1837, we really need a different direction. And so I'm wondering, what might a new age of poetry mean for us now? Those of us that do not believe that the material, capitalism, war, racism, sexism, toxic Christianity is what we should go back to. Is there a way that we can respond in a spiritual way, representing the enterprise of art, if you will, to begin the process of exhibiting the kind of example that's inspiring away from capitalism?
Well, a couple of things in that. Some of what you're talking about, we did touch on before you joined us, so you can go back and take a listen. But a couple of different things. You know, I was talking earlier about humanity being the fourth kingdom in nature, the kingdom of balance between the higher spiritual life and the lower areas of manifestation. this manifestation of balance is endemic to who we are as human beings. We get the chance to engineer balance over and over and over again. In the spiritual path, we talk about, the energies that lie within the spine and on other side of the spine, the Ida and Pingala of the snakes of the caduceus, or the energy currents along the spine that the Hindus talk about. And one is a masculine current, Pingala, and one is a feminine current, Ida. And we have to balance those currents so that they can take the middle way within the spine. But then the Sushumna, or the central spine, there's a balance within that between the uprising energies of Vajra, which are masculine, and the movement from matter upward towards spirit, and Kshatrini, which is the feminine, to receive that divine dew drip by drip into that central column. There's the balance that we have to achieve between the hemispheres of the brain and how they function. There's the balance that we have to develop between how the throat chakra works, where the throat chakra is indicative of the lower concrete mind and mathematics and details. But then the other side of it, its sort of right brain side, is artistic and poetic and so on and so forth. So it's not an either or, it's a balance. We're told that during the Atlantean period, the spiritual masters and adepts appeared in feminine bodies because it was a matriarchy. In our known recorded history, it's been a patriarchy. The age that we're moving into is an age of balance. And not only an age of balance between right brain, left brain, for instance, or details and art, but there's something new. This new age is the age of what's called the seventh ray, which is the age of spirit into matter, which means totally new stuff that we don't have a clue of yet because there are no forms for it yet. So with the descent of the soul, it's not only bringing into balance what's already here and correcting these, imbalances on every different level. I've said many times that it's a factor of humanity that if we didn't have race and ethnicity and gender and religion and politics to divide us, we would invent things to divide us. And so part of the solution is going to be something nobody expects. It's going to be something completely new that we'll have to have forms for. And when we talk about the reappearance of the Christ or the avatar for the coming age, the avatar always brings some completely new revelation. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus talked about God as love, people weren't talking about as God as love. They were talking about an angry God, a jealous God, a vengeful God, or gods. And the idea of God as love was completely new and revelatory. So this new dispensation will bring new tools and new things to, again, not only bring about the balances that we still have to work on, but it will bring in new things that we can't even think about at this point, but will be an outpicturing of our unfolding spiritual growth. And all spiritual growth is always, at every level, a greater comprehension of the one life, an expansion of being, not a constriction of being. Does that help?
Yes, I like that. I like that example of how the paradigm shifted, or a new way came on the scene with the idea of Christ being a creator of love and not of jealousy and war and chosen people theology. I will just shut up and say I hope we're open to the Asian values to achieve that rebalance, because I do believe China reemerging, and India, as you know more than I, they are not old civilizations; they are reemerging, and so I hope the Anglo-Saxon capitalist system is humble enough to learn from the reemerging civilizations to achieve that new paradigm. Thank you.
It's also important to remember that nations are entities and they are at different ages. And the United States is still in its adolescence, which should tell us a lot. And you know, when we look at the unfolding of nations, which have different incarnations, obviously the Italy of today is not the glory that was Rome, you know. So nations themselves come and go. They have reincarnational periods. They come in, they grow to maturity, they decline, they die. The form always changes. And so not every nation is at the same point in its unfolding age. And, you know, it said that the old Soviet Union, although the land is very old and the people and ethnicity is old, as its political entity, it's even younger than the United States. It became an entity in 1917. And so here, how could you not have conflict between a feminine nation, the United States, a masculine nation, Russia, both in their adolescence and both totally devoted to ideals that are vastly different from one another? Of course, you're going to have conflict. And so eventually, in our educational system, history will be taught not just in terms of memorizing battle dates, but in terms of the unfolding consciousness and the karma between nations and the different ray energies or qualities that play in a particular national incarnation. And so history will be seen as a whole connective thing of the unfolding consciousness of humanity.
Fantastic, Georgia. Thank you. This is just like keep expanding things so we are less constricted. I just feel it opening up throughout the program. Diane, you've been waiting patiently. You've had a question for a while.
One thing is that, I really can 1,000% concur with what you said earlier about we need to be holding, I say, the column of light, the center of light that at the highest level of vibration, evolution that we can individually, because this is what's going out to the world. And so I'm thinking, I see a lot of people around me, some on this call maybe, who seem to be in a lot of fear. And, somebody wrote to me the other day from New Zealand, an old friend, "Oh, I'm so worried. Aren't you fearful?" And I'm like, no, not in the least. And so I wonder what, you don't have to answer this, but just in the preface to the question, like, what is everyone so afraid of? Because if you're holding yourself in that higher state, would we really be afraid of any system? It's always been my view that any system can work if we have people who are in enlightened, Christed consciousness state. Okay, so that's my little comment here on the soapbox. But leading to, I'm very interested in what you said in the beginning about the hierarchy and the 100-year big confab meeting. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And I want to know also what you think about what I was just saying, that if you're in the highest light, what are we afraid of? It's just, you're viewing the unfolding, and you know that the higher we keep ourselves, the greater our contribution is to it, the evolution accelerating.
Sure. I mean, the old Roosevelt, all we have to fear is fear itself comment. I mean, you've got to think, what's the worst that could happen? We die? We're going to die anyway. So what's the big whoop? I mean, it's all being worked out here. It would be nice to work it out in more pleasant ways than we're choosing. But, if you're at one with humanity, this isn't just the exalted humanity. There's no such thing as opening up to the overshadowing soul without opening up to the indwelling soul of humanity. And the indwelling soul is still imprisoned and in pain. And part of the work is not walking around in a white light bubble, separating ourselves spiritually off from humanity, but opening the heart and moving outward into humanity. And that means connection. And again, this means our effect on the people that we meet in the grocery line or at the bank. Do we take the time to consider this is humanity, this is why I'm here, this is my service? One little technique that I always talk to my classes about is, you're in the grocery store and you see a young mother pushing a baby. If you can, look at that baby and realize, you don't know the age of the soul that's incarnating into that little form. And take just a few seconds and acknowledge that soul as a soul. Why is that important? Because most human beings go through their whole life, their whole incarnation, without another human being recognizing them as a soul. When you give that gift to an incoming new one, that means it's part of their experience, and they can magnetically draw that experience to them again and again because it's part of who they are and it's been recognized. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to get fearful when all of this craziness is happening in the world. I mean, I'm here in Southern California in the midst of all these fires that have been going on. And, that's a little concerning. There's one instance that I remember years ago. Some of you may know of Gordon Davidson and Corinne Helene, who wrote the book Spiritual Politics many, many years ago. I remember Gordon telling me once that he had built this home literally with his own hands and designed it. And when they were on vacation, it caught fire. And they came back where the flames were just finishing off the house. But this bronze statue of Buddha that they had had in their picture window, literally amid the flames, this Buddha was just sitting there in total peace. And he said that visual just imprinted on his consciousness. And, it was a lesson as to what we need to be in these times.
Mm-hmm. And what about the hierarchy and the meeting?
What the meeting is about, other than what I've already said, is above my pay grade. We know that the conclave has to do with the unfolding of the plan, and the immediate overshadowing step of the plan for the next 2,000 years is the externalization of the hierarchy back into human interaction. But, the details of that are what is going to be discussed by bigger minds than mine. Mm-hmm. A good thing to meditate on is particularly that love which alleviates fear. It's a particular aspect of second ray or love, and it's that love which alleviates fear. And just to do that daily and let that radiate out is in itself a service.
Yeah, another great reminder. All right, Suzanne, thank you, Georgia and Diane, for that part of the conversation. Suzanne, thanks also for waiting and go on with your question, please.
Well, the essence of what I was going to mention was the capacity that humanity has to divert the plan. It's a question and my own opinion about it. I'm a big Brian Swim fan, and in The Universe is a Green Dragon, he speaks about the creative force is the universe, and it creates itself. And it took a risk creating humans. The chapter is called Evil from Cosmic Risk, because before humans, nothing had the capacity to hurt the creation. But humans came along, and it was a risk that would humans help or hurt, because humans could, destroy. So so when I go back to my question about the danger we're in from overshoot, that's not the natural process of the cyclical nature of things changing. That's humans.
Yeah, but we can delay the plan, but we can't derail it.
You know, I wonder
It's bigger than us.
well, derail it in the sense of destroying humanity. The cosmos will go on, but I do think we can. I don't know, that's a question. Is it set that eventually we'll come through? But then when is eventually? How long is that? Do we go back to the Stone Age and start again? Because I just want to say the problem is overshoot. We're eating ourselves alive. We're eating, the resources we need. They're not going to regenerate. They took thousands, millions.
But remember that in normal times, whatever those are, there's not this many people in incarnation all at the same time. We have an overflow right now because of the energies that are beyond this planet that are coming together and coalescing at this amazing transition and time, not for just this planet. And so being in physical incarnation is the hot ticket in town. And so we have more people in physical incarnation than is usual for the planet. But in the bigger scheme of things, this is temporary.
Gosh knows, I hope you're right. I do love the idea, and I hadn't thought about that before, about the press of the wisdom coming down on us. And the idea of, I'm a big what to do because I actually do things, projects and what have you. But just the whole idea of all of us, regardless of whether you have an idea or not, being those instruments and letting the energy direct you to whatever it is. I mean, like I'm commenting a lot on webinars and talks and whatever, just injecting hopefully higher thoughts. Well, they are higher thoughts into sometimes mundane realities, but everybody can do that. We all can just be the instruments of that energy that's trying to pour in through us. Anyway, those are just my sort of body of thoughts to mention.
And to be patient with not only humanity, but our fellow disciples, again, not everybody has the same opinion religiously or politically or whatever. And one of the statements I make to my classes is the last prejudice to be overcome is the prejudice against prejudiced people. And that's the hardest. But we recognize that we're all part of the one life, and we're all waking up to that slowly, but we're waking up in numbers as never before. And that's part of this new energy that's hitting us and our solar system right now. It's making transition quicker than it's ever been. We can get things done in a decade that used to take 1,000 years. That's part of the promise of this particular time. It's also making things very uncomfortable because it seems like everything's happening all at once.
Well, Georgia, I want to thank you again. We will wrap up here. Thank you again, everyone that joined us and those who participated in the conversation. It expanded it even further, and I feel genuine warmth that the service that IFTT hoped to provide by creating this program and inviting Georgia to join us again at the beginning of this year. We've made great strides in that, and I'm very grateful, and I know others.
Can I add one quick thing?
Sure. Yes, I was going to ask you if there was anything you wanted to close with.
One quick thing.
Here we are.
One quick thing. In ancient calendars, the time between winter solstice, which is December 21st, and Candlemas or Imbolc, which is February 2nd, is called the terror time, not just because it was cold and snowy and wolves were about in the old days, but because this was the time that matter rearranges itself. Matter completes her cycle by giving birth to the Christ at the winter solstice. She fulfills her function as the mother, but she has to re-virginize in order to meet the impregnation in the spring, the full moons of the spring. So this time between winter solstice and February 2nd is a time when everything is thrown up to the winds. Matter is more easily moved. this is the time for new intent, new directions, because matter's in motion and it's unstable and that's uncomfortable. But it's also the time that new direction can be slipped in. It's not a coincidence that New Year's Eve with New Year's resolutions happens at the middle of this particular time. So we're almost to February 2nd. So this is the time to set new directions, set new intents, and get stuff moving.
That's wonderful reminder, and I'm glad that you did get that to us, Georgia. Can you tell everyone your website address, so if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, it's Lambert's Lodge, all one word, lambertslodge.org. I do have one on .com, but the one you want is .org. There's a page on it that has audio presentations on many esoteric subjects that I did back in PRS days working with Manly Palmer Hall, and they're free to download. So anybody can go to that page and take what you need.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Georgia. I think the only regret you may have is that we're probably going to ask you back. So why don't you put it in your calendar now for
You know where to find me.
2026. Yes. So, and thanks everyone again. And for those who came in late and those who find out about this later, please do watch the previous conversations again. I think hearing this over and over will help to bring us to that place that Diane was talking about, where we can kind of move past the fear that might grip us in our human emotional state, and move it past, and then bring us back into where we can provide some service and create things that everyone is really needing to move toward now. So this unfolds the way that I believe most of us at least want to see it, moving in a direction of love, light, and peace. So thank you again, Georgia. Have a wonderful evening.